Daf Yudalad Amud Beis. We'll begin Yudalad Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the bottom, continuing on with the Yud Ches Gzeres. The next one in the sequence is Yadayim, hands. Stam Yadayim, hands that have not previously been washed. There was no Natilas Yadayim. The Rabbanan were geyser that the hand should have a din of Ashini Latuma. If it touches the Truma, it passes the Truma and makes the Truma into a Shlishi. So what is the reason? Why were they geyser that hands, if they did not have Natilas Yadayim previously, that they have a din of Asheni? Why should they passel the Truma? The Yadayim, the Gemara says, Yadayim Askoni is saying, because hands, a person inadvertently will touch things. He'll touch places which aren't clean. It's a disgrace. It's a bizoyin for the Truma that the Truma, which is Kodesh, should be touched with hands which are not clean. So therefore, to ensure that that didn't happen, they were geyser that it'll passel the Truma, therefore ensuring that the hands will be washed previously. Rashi brings on another shita that says it's because of touching Tuma, which Rashi rejects. Other Rishonim do learn that way, but Rashi learns the pshat is that because the hands are askonius, they inadvertently will touch places that are not clean on the body or other places that are not clean, and it's a bizayin, it's a disgrace for the truma to come into contact with hands that are not clean. So therefore, to ensure that that didn't happen, the Rabban were geyser that you have to wash your hands prior to touching the truma. Tana after Yadayim Boz Machmas Sefer Paisel said Truma. An additional exer was that the Yadayim that Boz Machmas Sefer, if hands touched a Sefer Torah, or as Taisa says, not only a Sefer Torah but other Kisvei Kodesh, those hands become now Tomei. They have a din of Asheni, and they will passel the Truma. The Gemara will ask shortly, all hands have a din of Asheni. Why dafka hands which touch the Kisvei Kodesh? So that we'll see shortly. So hands that touch Sifrei Kodesh. Why is that? Why were the guys too much for that? Mishum de Raparnach, because of the reason of Raparnach, Tam Raparnach Amar V'Yochanan. Ha'oiches Sefer Torah Orum. If a person touches a Sefer Torah without Orum, without having it covering, it's not covered. The Sefer Torah is not covered. Nikver Arum. He is Nikver Arum. He's buried without clothing, without shrouds. Should we be mevaza the mess and not have him buried Nikver with clothing? He's buried without mitzvahs. It's considered like he didn't do any mitzvahs. He didn't do any mitzvahs. This cancels out all the mitzvahs he did in his whole life. It's aram beloy oisam mitzvah. Without this mitzvah. He's aram without this mitzvah. Without the mitzvah, as Taisa says, if he was learning from the Sefer Torah and he touched the Sefer Torah, then that mitzvah learning is canceled out. Or if he does Galila or Hagbah and he touches, that particular mitzvah is canceled out. So therefore, in order to ensure that the person did not touch the Kisvei Kodesh, in order that he doesn't touch the Kisvei Kodesh with hands, directly with his hands, they were geyser that if he did, his hands should become Tomei. And his hands should be Asheni, and they should be now passel the Truma. That's the reason that they were geyser this additional Tuma for hands that touched a Sefer. So for the Gemara, which takana, we have two takanas here. We have Stam Yadayim, and we have Yadayim that touch the Sefer. So for the Gemara, Hi Gaza Bereisha. Which Gzera came first? We have a Gzera of Stam Yadayim, and we have a Gzera of hands that touch the Kisvei Kodesh. So Hi Gaza Bereisha. Ilema Ha Gaza Bereisha. If you're going to say that they were geyser on Stam Yadayim first, that all hands have a din, generally speaking, without Natilas Yadayim, hands have a din of Asheni Latuma. So how could that be? Kevan the Ha Gaza Bereisha. If they were already geyser on all hands, that Stam Yadayim have a din of Tuma. So came the Ha Gaza Bereisha. Hasu Lomali. Why do I need this additional gzer if he touched the Sefer, if he touched Kisvei Kodesh? If his all hands are a Tomei, even if he didn't touch a Sefer, it's Tomei. So what's being added by what's being added to say that if he touched the sefer, then his hands become tummy. They're tummy anyway. Well, perhaps it's no, to cover a situation. Stam yadayim are tummy. Stam yadayim are tummy if you didn't do netilas yadayim. But if he did netilas yadayim, and then he's allowed to eat the truma. So perhaps the case is, what's being added over here is, if he did netilas yadayim, and immediately after netilas yadayim he touched the sefer, now his hands would become tummy again. Without this additional gzeira, you would say, Sam yadayim are tummy, yes, but he washed his hands, now he can eat truma. But if he touched the sefer immediately, without any hesach hadas, then without this additional gzeira, it would be tor, and now it's tummy. Dirshu says for that unusual case, there would not be goyz the gzeira for that unusual case. That hands he washed, and without any hadas, immediately he touched the kisvei kodesh. So therefore, it can't be that the gzeira of stam yadayim was first. So ella hachzera halchgazaberation. Ella it must be that the gzeira of a sefer was first. The first geyser that the hands that touch the sefer are tummy. So that a person should not be mevaza the kisvei kodesh and touch it with hands directly. And then after a later time, there were geyser on stam yadayim, even if it didn't touch kisvei kodesh, stam yadayim, all hands without netilas yadayim are tummy. The next in the sequence is utful yom. A person utful yom, if he touches truma, he makes a truma and shlit. He passes a truma. Frank the Gemara, what do you mean? Tful yom deraisa. Tful yom is min hatayra. Again, a tful yom, like we discussed before, a person who was tummy. So, for instance, he touched the sherets, so he's tummy. He went to the mikveh that day. So once he goes to the mikveh, even the same day he goes to the mikveh, it removes part of the tumah. It reduces the tumah, but he's not Torah completely. He's called a tful yom. Until nightfall, he still would not be allowed to eat truma, and he would touch it, he would pass it. That's min hatayra. Tful yom deraisa d'chsiv u'ba shemesh v'tar. It's u'ba shemesh at the nighttime. That's when he's tar. Only in the nighttime can he eat or touch truma. During the daytime, when he's considered a tful yom, it's also min hatayra. Where it says in a chanami. That's not one of the yurches gzeras. Some mikan tful yom. That's not one of the yurches. Remove that from the list. Taisa says, remove it from the list of yurches gzeras, but not from the Mishnah. The Mishnah is discussing the things, all of the items that would make truma into a shlishi. This is one of the things that would make, one of the cases that would make truma into a shlishi. If a tful yom touches the truma, it passes it. So it's not removing it from the Mishnah, but remove it from the list of yurches dollar. So the next on the list are foods that came into contact with liquids. If that food then came into contact with the truma, it passes it. What type of liquid did that food come into contact with? If it's a liquid that came into contact with the sherets, and then that liquid touched a food, and then that food touched the truma, so that's deraisa ninu. That's not one of the yurches gzeras, that's a deraisa. Any liquid that could be drunk, then it becomes tome. Now the context of the pasuk is talking about liquids that are in klicheres, but we learn out from there, we derive from a kal v'chomer, it's talking about a sherets as well. So that's a deraisa. If the liquid came into contact with the sherets is an avatuma. The liquid become a rishon. A food that touched that liquid would be a sheni. It would pass all the truma. That's a deraisa, not one of the yurches gzeras. Elo b'mashkim aboy machmas yadayim. Elamai, the mashka, what we're the gzer over here, is the mashka that came into contact with hands. Now, hands are midrabanan only sheni. They made a further gzera that the hands, which are only midrabanan sheni, liquids that came into contact to it, not only were they geyser atuma, but they were geyser atuma that the liquids become a rishon. So it's an added chumrah. Now, normally the sequence of tumah is it goes down. A rishon to a sheni to shlishi. Now, hands on their own, in itself, is exerted rabbanan. But further to that, added to that, it is even contrary, the gzera is even contrary to the normal sequence of tumah. Instead of going down a level, we say that the liquid came into contact, even with a sheni, it becomes a rishon. Now, therefore, the liquid is a rishon, the food that touched the liquid is a sheni, and if it touched the truma, it makes it a shlishi. So they were very machmir on liquids in this case. Why were they so machmir? Because there were guys there for liquids, on the case of the liquids which came into contact with the sheretz. If liquids came into contact with the sheretz midaraisa, it's a rishon. So therefore they were machmir, very machmir in the case of liquids, that any tuma that the liquids come into contact with have a din of a rishon, just like if it come into contact with the sheretz. So the kahanim should be very vigilant and very careful to ensure that the liquids did not come into contact with any tuma whatsoever, and certainly not a sheretz. Certainly not an avatuma, which is a deraisa, which would make it a rishon deraisa. Rashi points out, why were they so machmir on liquids and not on foods? Why not say the same thing by food? That if a food came into contact with a tuma, then it should become a rishon, just like liquids. Rashi says because liquids are more susceptible to tuma. The general rule is by a eichel, it does not makabel tuma unless it has a hechsher, unless it came into contact with a liquid prior to coming into contact with the tuma. So therefore, it's not as susceptible to tumah. But liquids don't need a hechsher; they themselves are a liquid. So a liquid that comes into contact with tumah immediately it becomes tomei deraisa. If it's an avatuma that it came into contact with, it becomes tomei deraisa. So liquids are much more susceptible to tumah, and therefore they were very, very machmir to impress on the kohanim to be very vigilant and legabe the dinim of tumah by liquids, and they were geyser that even a sheni comes into contact with a liquid, it makes it a rishon. So the case that we're talking about over here is that a liquid came into contact with hands, which is a sheni, even in midrabanan is a sheni, it makes the liquid into a rishon, and the food that touches that is a sheni, it'll make the truma, it'll passel the truma. The next case is vakelim shenitmu b'mashkin, that kelim, utensils that were nitma with a mashka, with a liquid. So the kalim touch the liquid. The kalim now become a sheni. They touch the truma, they make it into a shlishi, they passel the truma. What type of liquid are we talking about that came into contact with? If it's a liquid from a zav who is tomei d'oraisa, is an avatuma. So a liquid, for instance, spit, saliva from the zav. And if that touched the liquid, that's the deraisa in it. That's a deraisa. That's not a derabana. If the zav spits on some tor, he makes him tomei. Now the Gemara continues, Mashbiyat tor to meisilach, which Rashi mentions. This is really not negeya to what we're discussing. It's a separate din. The liquid of a zav, for instance, the saliva, it comes into contact with a person, it'll make the person tomei. The person becomes tomei. So that's an av, the person will become now a rishon. And a separate din is mashbiyad. If the saliva is in a container, it's in a cup, and he's carrying the cup, he's also tomei masa, even though he's not touching it, it's tomei masa, he's also tomei, which is a separate din. But I'll call upon him, the ikar point over here is that we can't be talking about that it came into contact with the liquid of a zav, because then it would be a deraisa. What we're talking about is that the kli, the utensil, came into contact with a liquid that touched the sheretz. Now, as we said before, the sheretz touches a liquid, midaraisa, it's a rishon. But min ha'torah, a rishon l'tumah is not matama kelim. Min ha'torah, a rishon l'tumah is not matama odom kelim. It's matama food, but not, it's matama liquids, but it's not matama kelim. So over here, we're talking about a mashka that came into contact with the sheretz, where minat Torah, it would not be matama the kli. Midarabonon, we were geyser, Yudches Gzeres, we were geyser, that it's Matama the Kli, and that for the Kli who touched the Truma, it passed the Truma. Why were they geyser the Gzer? Gzer Mishum Mashke the Zav. Because the regardless, because if it touches any liquid, it might be confused with a secretion from the zav, a liquid of a zav, which is Talmud Deraisa. They were geyser on all liquids that are Talmud, a liquid of a sheretz, any kind of tumah that the liquid touched, even if it touched a tumah which midaraisa would make it a rishon, they were geyser that a keli that touches it becomes Talmud midarabanan. Frag the Gemara v'yadayim. So we mentioned the gzera about hands, that stam yadayim are talmei. We treat it like a shein l'tuma. Frag the Gemara v'yadayim. Tell me the Shammai v'hil gozer. You tell me that's one of the Yurches Dover, and it was part of the 18 gzeras of Shammai v'hil. So you tell me that's one of the gzeras of that yadayim talmidei Shammai v'hil. That's one of the gzeras of the talmidim of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So how can that be? So Shammai v'Hillel goes. It wasn't the Talmidim of Shammai v'Hillel. It wasn't based. It was the Shammai v'Hillel themselves. The Tanya Yosef ben Yoezer Yisrael Yosef ben Yochanan Yerushalayim gozer Tumal Eretz Ham. So this is the list of what some of the gzeras they made. One is Tumas Eretz Hamim. If a person goes to Chutz La'aretz, has a din of Tumah, or if the earth of Chutz La'aretz comes to Eretz Yisrael, has a din of Tumah. Why are they gezer Tumah? Because in Eretz Hamim in Chutz La'aretz, the Goyim were not careful about where they buried the mesim, and in every area of land there might be a mes, there might be tumah. So there were geyser generally, and Chutz La'aretz has a din of tumah. So if somebody goes from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz, there were geyser that he has a din of a tomei mes. That's one example about Klei's chuchis. They were geyser on kelim of glassware. Torah doesn't mention glass, so Torah a utensil, a kli that comes in of glass, made out of glass, comes in contact with tumah is not tumah. They were geyser. We'll see why shortly in the Gemara. Why they were geyser? They were geyser on glassware that's also mekabel tumah. Shimon ben Shantach tiken ksuva leisha. He was geyser, misakin rather, aksuva for an isha. Now, as Rashi explains, it doesn't mean he was geyser. He was misakin rather. The etzem din of a ksuva. The ksuva was from beforehand, but he was geyser, his masakin, that a husband's all his property are achroi, are responsible. There's a lien on all of his property to ensure the payment of the ksuva. Why was he masakin that? He was masakin it because previous to that, a person would designate a certain item of value to be a lien for the ksuva. So it was all said in advance. The ksuva was written in advance, of course, and the minig was that he would set aside a certain item of value to cover the expense of the ksuva, the cost of the ksuva. Now, if there would be some sort of argument, he'd get upset with his wife, he immediately would then impulsively give the ksuva, and here's the item, and divorce without calming down or without thinking it through. So therefore he was geyser that it's not one item that's achroi for the ksuva, it's all of the husband's property is achroi is responsible for the ksuva, and there's a lien on all of his property. Therefore the minig was no longer that a person would set aside a specific item for the ksuva, because there would be no point to it. All of his property is achroi for the ksuva. Therefore he did not set aside a particular item for the ksuva, and therefore he would not as impulsively divorce his wife, because now does he have the resources to pay for the ksuva? Does he not have the resources? He would not have the means to pay for the ksuva readily at hand, so therefore he would not impulsively divorce us. That's the way he's misakin that takona for the ksuva. Also, v'gazer tuma kli matchas. He was geyser tuma on a metal keli. The Gemara will discuss a little bit later. That's the Raisa. We'll see what this takana was. But to our point, Shammai v'Hillel gazer tuma al yadayim. They were geyser tuma in their hands. So you see that Tagzera of the Yadayim was Shammai v'Hillel, not Talmidei Shammai v'Hillel. Maybe you'll say it means Shammai v'Hillel means that together with the Talmidim. These Yurches Dover, they were geyser, they had a machlokes, they argued on all of these 18 things. Shammai then overpowered the Hillel, or Beis Shammai rather, the Talmid of Shammai, and they were geyser on Yudches, 18 things. So this takona of Yudches Davar were 18 machlaikisim and 18 gzera. But Hillel and Shammai themselves, they only argued in 3 places. The Talmidim argued in many places. But Shammai and Hillel themselves only in 3 places. So this could not have been part of the Yudches Dover, because there were that day they were nechleku on 18 enactments, and they were geyser Yudches Dover. It couldn't be Shammai and Hillel themselves that were part of it. Domer of Huna, begimlu kamis nechleku v'suloi. Shammai and Hillel themselves only argued in 3 places, so they could not have been part of this gathering where they were geyser the Yudches Dover. Maybe you'll say really it happened at 2 stages. Initially, Hillel and Shammai were geyser that the hands that touched the truma, not that it was a vadai truma, it was a sofek truma. We treated it like a sofek truma. Now the thing is, if there's a vadai truma, if truma came into contact with something which is certainly truma, you have to burn it. If truma itself, which is not tome, cannot be burnt. If it came into contact with a sofek tuma, so the thing is, you can't eat it, but you can't burn it either, it's litlis, it's suspended. So perhaps you'll say that the original takana, the first stage of the takana, where Hillel and Shammai, they were masakin, they were geyser, treated as a sofek. And it's only midrabanan, and the hands, treated as a sofek, don't burn it, just litlis. Then the second stage is the Talmidim, and on this period of time with the Yudches Dovar, and the Aliyah of Hananya ben Chizkiah ben Goran, they were geyser even further, a second stage, to burn it, to treat it as a vanai tum and burn it. So maybe you'll say maybe you'll say that that was the sequence of events. No, the very first enactment was to burn it, to treat it as a vanai and burn it. There was talk at 2 stages. The first stage was Hillel and Shammai. They were geyser. They didn't argue on the point. They were geyser, but the populace were not makabel. They didn't accept it, so it did not take root. Then Vasu Talmidaya goes over Kibluminayu. And then at this later stage, the event that we're discussing over here in our Mishnah, this event was a later stage where the Talmidim came together and they were geyser, and then it took hold, and the Gzera, the makabel that Gzera.